Good evening, friends. This side Rahul Magan, and today on 28th December 2019, practically 2 a.m. in the morning, we are going to be shooting a pretty important video about the dynamics of startup funding in India. Effective 2016, we continuously reporting on WhatsApp channels of our WhatsApp channels, basically WhatsApp groups, the other WhatsApp group of venture capitalist space WhatsApp group that the startup funding in India is bound to lose or it is bound to crash. A lot of times we get a personal negative remark that you are saying is wrong and so on and so forth. But I hope you are reading one business newspaper in a day, and this time I am not going to talk about SoftBank because everyone know what is happening with the SoftBank. And hats off to the Goldman the way they created their credit line. I'm damn sure that many of the people even do not know that how credit line is being created. Neither the so-called degrees like Institute of Chartered Accountant of India, Company Secretary, Cost Accountant of India, Certified Financial Analyst, GARP, Faltu Risk Management, FRM, they teach about credit line. SoftBank story is more or less over, and we once again repeat that it will not wind up in 2020. SoftBank will wind up in 2021, but just like a volcano, the cracks would be more apparent in 2020. But eventually there is one parallel undercurrent which is happening in the venture capitalist space, and in this parallel undercurrent, before starting this parallel undercurrent, I would like to talk something bit, which is that in this 2-3 days, Quicker asked around 500 people to 600 people to step down, while Food Panda reported a substantial loss of over 750 crores. Shopclues reported roughly 60 plus crore loss. And more importantly, there is one more startup, I'm missing the name, they also reported a very hefty loss. So majority of the startups in India are reporting the losses, and these are the big names that come in the public domain. Because I once again repeat that the biggest problem with the startup and the VC financing space is that only few, just like you have 10 fingers in your both hands, just like few, less than 10 companies we have, those who collects the data of VC and PE. And once they collect it, they don't sell it in the public space. They sell at a very high cost. So getting this data is very, very tough. Like today, I was talking to somebody, not talking to somebody. In fact, when I was posting the thoughts on our WhatsApp group about the startup funding, let me open my WhatsApp group and I'll show you out. In our WhatsApp group, I was talking it about, like, in the morning I collected some data. Yes, guys, do you know, if I add the 5 private equity players worldwide, only 5 private equity players, which includes the Blackstone, the total AUM of Blackstone is 91,000 crores. If I include BlackRock, it is roughly 89,000 crore. If I include Brookfield, it is 1,39,000 crores. If I add CPPIB, which is Canadian Pension Fund, which is 56,000 crores. And if I include the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is GIC, it is roughly 7,000 crores. Two of them are having figures as at December 18. So the fresh figures as at December 19 or maybe 1-2 months earlier than December 19 is not available. But having said that, if I add the 5, then the total private equity funding, total AUM of these private equity players add up 3,82,000 crores. So the numbers which I am reading is actually from our own WhatsApp group, but this group is not for everybody. This is a group only for the elite people, and this is on the invitation basis. So this group is not in the public domain. In fact, Reserve Bank of India governor himself is not authorized to join this group. Forget other people. So there is an undercurrent which is happening. Now, two undercurrent which is happening is that just like East India Company, when they came to India and they acquired almost the entire India one by one, Similarly, the private equity players' asset under management is growing at a much faster pace. In fact, without quoting the name of Indian companies are in desperate situation to join these private equity players because they do not have cash, like the Loda Group, who do not have the funds to pay $325 million, which is supposed to due in March 2020. So startup funding is shifting from hefty checks to be issued by SoftBank to the few private equity players. Another undercurrent which is happening in startups is that Chinese investors are continuously coming in and pumping a lot of money, just like Tencent. They are getting very aggressive, but that's a different thing. That unlike Brookfield, Blackstone and BlackRock, they do not come in the public space too often. They come public space on a very limited time. So I am fortunate, I got two different sources of data from the newspaper. The first source of data is that the startup financing slowed in 2019, rose only 2% against 100% in 2018. That's, I'm not saying, the data is saying. Now this data suggests that in 2000 and now let me read, after a surge of 100% in startup funding during 2018, the year 2019 ending near 2% growth rate in value terms. So in 2019 we end up around 63,350 crores of funding. In dollar terms, this is equals to 8.9 billion. While similarly in 2018, the total funding was 8.7 billion. So the startup funding in India from 8.7 billion in 2018, and I'm talking about calendar year, not fiscal year which government follows, it grew to 8.9 billion, only 2% increase. And more importantly, the total number of deals, which used to be 664 in 2018, now it reduces to 656. But data is more. Data is that in 2015, the total amount of funding happens in Indian startup, which include venture capitalists in seed funding, Series A and seed to Series F, is 5.5 billion. In 2016, it reduces to 4.2 billion, while in 2017, more or less flat, 4.3 billion. In 2018, it substantially grew up to double, which is 8.7 billion. And in 2019, it is roughly 8.9 billion. And we can see clearly that the number of deals are falling. Like 2015, the total number of deals against 5.5 billion is 747 deals. Like if I use my calculator, which is right here, so you said 5.5 billion and 747. So per deal used to get roughly 7.36 million. Now if I compare this with 2019, I get roughly 13.5 million. So from 7.3 million to 13.5 million, you can very well guess it's more than 50% jump. Now the question is very, very clear that, that thematic theme is happening, that is for sure. We have seen in terms of Car Dekho, we have seen in terms of Paytm, we have seen in terms of Ola. Well, there is no words I have for Oyo. One side, Ritesh Agarwal claims that his company is over 10 billion. Another side, the company is in deep losses and company is asking people to step down. But they are unicorn. Anyways, another scene which is disturbing me, very much disturbing me, is the thematicness. And I'm very much disturbed out of it. Because you know that I always compare one point of data with another point of data. It is 2 a.m. in the morning and I'm talking to you only because I love talking videos. I love giving knowledge to the people, and our upcoming venture capitalist desk would talk a lot. Give us some time. It is on the way in 2020. I got this piece of data, and thank you to my habit of reading 2 business newspapers in a day. And I got this piece of data This piece of data talking cross-border love for Indian startups. I take this A, I take this B. Now use your mind and you get a lot of good answers. It is that the Chinese private equity and the venture capitalist investment in the India is growing in leap and bounds. And same scene is happening in Singapore also. In fact, we know that officially or unofficially speaking, that's your call. But Africa, Sri Lanka, Pakistan and multiple Southeast Asian economies, they are completely under the control of China. Politically or non-politically speaking, without naming anybody from China or from these countries. We know that whatever China wants, these countries do. And we have not only seen this once or twice, we saw this number of times. And this occasionally happens. Now the moral of the story is that I have taken two pieces of data. Now let's talk using numbers. In 2015, total investment done in India in the VC space is 5.5 billion. This data is saying out of 5.5 billion, 1.744, which is 1.7 billion. So let me take this piece of paper. Yeah, I can write here 1.744 divided by 5.5, which means roughly 31.8% of the 2015 funding is happened via Chinese route. I come to 2016, out of 4.2 billion, around $459 million come from China. So 459 divided by, which is roughly 11% comes from China. Now here comes the upward graph. 2017, out of 4.3 billion of total funding, around 1.54 billion, which is around 36% comes from China. See this. In 2015, out of total funding, around 32% comes from China. It draw down to 2016, reduces to 11%, which is roughly one third. In 2017, it grew by at least 3 times to 36%, but the story has not yet ended. The story is in 2018, out of $8.7 billion of funding, around $2 billion comes from China. Which is roughly 23%. And now the scene is more important. In 2019, out of 8.9 billion, around 4 billion comes from China. Which is roughly 46%. Now you can very well see that the Chinese, that without quoting the name of any political party or any political agenda, whenever there is a festival season comes in India, the political parties across India always speak, don't buy Chinese goods, don't buy Chinese goods, and all, patriotic theme and everything. Mr. Nehru versus the Chinese war somewhere happened in 1965 and all these kind of stuff and all. In 2015, the total investment by the same Chinese company in India is 31.8%. In 2016, 11%. 2017, 36%. 2018, 23%. And 2019, which is not yet completed, but it is approximately 46%. If I numerically speak, it means that the startup funding in India grew only 2%. Use your mathematics. The startup funding in India grew only 2% on holistically note in 2019 versus 2018. However, the contribution of Chinese in the last 2 years grew by 50%, 100%. Because last year it was 2 billion, now it is 4 billion. Chinese are taking position very fast worldwide and they are investing everywhere. And we should not forget that Chinese are very aggressive players and they think foresight. Few important Chinese names that always come in the public domain is the Alibaba, is the Tencent, is the Lightspeed, and there are multiple. And we also should not forget that Paytm is heavily being funded by the Chinese players. Ultimately, moral of the story is very simple and concise, that one side, the Indian startup story is dying because the total number of deals are falling. There is a heavy thematicness which is happening. More importantly, the venture capitalists do not have the money because the major source of the money, the glacier of the money, which is SoftBank, is melting at a very faster pace. The recent credit line sanctioned by Goldman of $1.75 billion to WeWork via SoftBank clearly confirms that Goldman is not taking any call on the WeWork, rather it is taking both credit and FX call on the SoftBank. SoftBank internal debt is also very high, that is also a cause of concern. The failure of Uber and the WeWork is hitting very hard. Travis, which is the co-founder of Uber, quitted the Uber board and he sold all his shares, which clearly signifies that something mess is going to happen, which is clearly evident also that the Uber IPO listed around what, roughly $47-48, and today it is roughly $24, which is 100% drawdown. More importantly, the Chinese contribution in the Indian startup story is rising at a much faster pace, while the American venture capitalist contribution is falling. So if I look 2019, which has not yet completed, 46% of the total funding happened in the Indian startups is only by China. 46%. This suggests that the Indian startups are very prone to Chinese funding, and remember that whenever a venture, now one data which I do not have in both of the data, I got it from paper, is that this funding, according to me, being a small time venture capitalist, definitely not happening from equity route. I am damn sure, because no venture capitalist will fund via equity route. This funding would surely happen via debt financing route. But unfortunately, the whole the data which I have, this data do not tell me that whether it is debt financing or equity or what is the composition of debt financing. Like recently, just few days before, one company who is in the digital financing space, they raised around 100 plus crore, and that is also a debt funding, because a lot of debt funding is happening. The question which comes here, three big questions, and you need to answer these questions. Number one, what would if 2 months from immediately after 365 days, which is December 2020, this 46% which is today will grow to 80%. I don't know, but prospect is very high. Condition number two, we don't have the data, but we ourselves agree that this is not equity funding, this is a debt funding. Whether Indian firms would be able to pay the debt, forget the principles, you know the situation of Indian economy, Indian funds and many things. If not, then would Chinese company acquire these companies? Is it a political and a tactical call from the Chinese venture capitalist? Looks like yes. And third, very important thing, the big boys like Tencent, Didi and Alibaba and Financial, their extensive exposure in multiple companies make them aligned to run as per their way, not as per the company's way. And till what extent the government will permit that, we don't know, because that is also a fact that in India officially there is no code which is written which will protect or which will govern the venture capitalist and the private equity space. In fact, why India, in Southeast Asia also there is no written code which will protect the investor, the investee as well as investor, and that is the biggest loop flip side we have in the VC and PE space. With this, we thank you very much, but remember one thing very clearly, that whatever you see in media is not always correct. The correct thing will only come when you put one data and with second data and compare with each other. This is in English known as the juxtaposition testing. And if you do such juxtaposition testing, you will get a lot of answers. We thank you very much, and as you know that we started selling our derivatives on Amazon. You can open amazon.com and type Rahul Magan, my name. You would be able to buy a derivative contracts from Amazon. Today the total count of the derivatives which we have on Amazon is 8 plus. We are expecting to touch 100 plus in 2000 by December 2020. Our foreign exchange desk will have a substantial presence on Amazon. Apart from that, the company is in advanced stages to launch the product on Flipkart, on Lazada, and hopefully on the ShopClues. We already started our journey to be an e-commerce player, and by the end of this year, we expect to sell on multiple e-commerce platforms. Everything going good for Treasury Consulting. Being a cash-rich company, we are not in the hands of any venture capitalist or the private equity. And don't forget, on Monday evening, which is 30th December evening, Treasury Consulting is officially filing for the bank license in Singapore, and we would be the youngest company who will file for the bank license in Singapore. Have a good time. You know my mobile number, which is +91 9899242978. You know our fixed income platform, www.fixedincome.global. Have a great time. Talk soon.